The story of the Rönesans Finance begins in a quiet and unremarkable space, a room filled with notebooks, aging financial books, and a few computers that hummed softly through the night. This room was located in a modest corner of a city that was undergoing rapid change. High towers were rising across the skyline, markets were becoming more global, and technology was reshaping the meaning of work and wealth. In the middle of this transformation, a small group of thinkers gathered to ask a single question. Can a financial institution be built with both strength and moral purpose? This question did not come from idealism but from experience. The early members of the Rönesans group had witnessed many financial collapses in the world. They had seen institutions that were once giants fall into crisis because they relied too heavily on speculation. They watched companies lose public trust because their systems were hidden or manipulated. They understood that money can create progress, but it can also create destruction when it is handled without responsibility. For this reason they wanted to build something new. They wanted to create an institution that would survive not only through good years but through the hardest years. They wanted to build a financial model that was both modern and timeless. The founders began by studying the deep patterns of economic history. They examined how ancient trade routes operated, how medieval guilds protected their members, how early banks formed in European cities, and how industrialization gave rise to new financial structures. They compared this with modern digital economies, data-driven markets, and emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence. They wanted to identify what factors remained constant across eras. They discovered that the most resilient systems were always transparent, predictable, and grounded in real value instead of illusions. This discovery became the seed of their first principle, the principle they later called the clear foundation. This principle stated that every action of the Rönesans Finance must be understandable. Records must be traceable, risks must be measured, decisions must be guided by data and by long-term vision instead of emotion. This principle did not make the company rigid. Instead, it made the company stable. Like a well-built bridge, the structure could bear enormous pressure because every part of it was visible and reinforced. While building the clear foundation, the founders also explored the psychological side of finance. They observed that many financial failures were caused not by market forces but by human impulses. Greed, fear, impatience, pride, and the desire for rapid reward often weakened entire institutions. The Rönesans group believed that a truly strong financial model must integrate an understanding of human behavior. They believed that discipline, patience, and ethical awareness must be part of the structure. Finance must not only deal with numbers but also with the emotions behind those numbers. As these ideas grew, the founders realized they needed a strong research department. This department became the heart of the company long before the company became large. The research team collected data about everything, from global energy consumption to trade patterns, from new technological inventions to the long-term effects of demographic change. They were not chasing quick profits. They were building a map of the future. They wanted to understand how nations rise and fall, how markets expand and contract, how societies adapt to new economic realities. Their research helped build the company culture of caution, depth, and clarity. In the early years, the Rönesans Finance did not announce itself loudly. Instead, it grew quietly through partnerships with local businesses, educational institutions, and infrastructure projects. They provided carefully structured loans with long-term repayment plans. They helped young entrepreneurs start companies that created real value instead of speculative bubbles. They invested in renewable energy projects, digital networks, and agricultural modernization. They believed that finance should strengthen the foundations of society, not weaken them. As their reputation grew, the company began receiving attention from international observers. Economists were fascinated by their stability during periods of market turbulence. Investors were drawn to the accuracy of their long-term predictions. Governments were impressed by their ability to guide economic development without creating dependency. As a result, the Rönesans Finance transitioned from a regional institution into a force with global relevance. One of the most important innovations of the Rönesans Finance was the strategic capital model. Traditional financial institutions often spread investments widely across many unrelated industries. This created the illusion of diversification but often resulted in weakened strategy. The Rönesans model worked differently. They built interconnected economic ecosystems where each investment supported another. For example, a technology investment might be linked to an energy project, which would be linked to a transportation network, which would support a consumer market. This interconnected approach reduced volatility because each sector strengthened the others. It also allowed the company to support long-term projects that would take decades to mature. The Rönesans Finance divided its operations into a tri-sector system that guided its growth for many years. The first sector was global asset development, which focused on creating long-term economic infrastructure such as transportation networks, digital systems, and energy facilities. The second sector was technology advancement, which invested in research groups, software companies, and emerging technologies. The third sector was real economy influence, which supported agriculture, education, healthcare, and sustainable community projects. The tri-sector model allowed the company to maintain balance even when global markets shifted dramatically. Over time, the company built academies and training centers to educate young financial thinkers. These academies became widely respected for their rigorous approach. Students learned economic history, data analysis, geopolitical strategy, and ethical philosophy. They studied real-world case studies of financial crises and reform movements. They learned how to predict market trends without falling into emotional reactions. Many graduates went on to become leaders in finance, technology, and government. These academies helped spread the philosophy of the Rönesans Finance across many nations. One of the turning points in the company's history came when it was invited to help restructure the financial system of a developing nation that had experienced decades of instability. The company spent years gathering data, meeting with local leaders, understanding cultural expectations, and building educational programs. Their plan included restructuring debt, modernizing banks, training new financial workers, and creating investment pathways for local businesses. The transformation took time, but it succeeded. The nation recovered its economic strength, and this success gave the Rönesans Finance worldwide credibility. Another major achievement occurred when they invested in a massive digital infrastructure project across several countries. This project connected millions of rural homes to the internet, supported new online marketplaces, and gave people access to remote education services. It changed the economic landscape of entire regions. Many families who had been isolated from global trade now gained access to markets, information, and financial tools. This project demonstrated how finance could be a force for empowerment rather than exploitation. Despite these accomplishments, the Rönesans Finance faced periods of tension. In times of global recession, the company was tested. Some critics accused them of avoiding risky investments that could produce rapid profits. Political groups in certain nations attempted to influence their decisions. Rival companies tried to copy their model without understanding the philosophy behind it. Yet through all challenges, the Rönesans leadership remained steady. They returned to their data, their principles, and their long-horizon vision. Their patience allowed them to survive storms that destroyed many competitors. The Rönesans Finance became known for its remarkable ability to identify long-term trends. They foresaw the rise of automation before it became mainstream. They predicted the shift toward renewable energy years before governments made commitments. They recognized the importance of data infrastructure long before it became a global priority. Their predictions were based not on intuition but on a disciplined study of patterns. They understood that the world changes through slow and steady movements rather than sudden surprises. As the decades passed, the company became a global center for economic thought. Scholars, engineers, entrepreneurs, and political leaders attended conferences organized by the Rönesans Group. These events explored questions about the future of work, the ethics of artificial intelligence, the evolution of global trade, and the responsibilities of financial institutions. The company encouraged open debate and long-term planning. Many of the ideas that shaped policy in various nations were first discussed at these gatherings. In addition to intellectual activities, the Rönesans Group launched large humanitarian projects. They built financial literacy programs for rural communities. They created micro-investment systems that supported small businesses owned by farmers, teachers, and local craftsmen. They funded educational programs for women and young people who lacked access to traditional financial systems. These humanitarian efforts were not an accessory to the company but a core part of its identity. They believed that economic opportunity must be available to everyone for society to remain stable. As the documentary reaches its final chapters, it reflects on the legacy of the Rönesans Finance. It is the legacy of a company that believed finance must be transparent, disciplined, and intelligent. It is the legacy of a company that proved long-term thinking can create success even in unstable environments. It is the legacy of a company that used its influence not to dominate nations but to strengthen them. The Rönesans model became a blueprint for responsible finance around the world. Today, the Rönesans Finance stands as a symbol of stability and wisdom in a world that often moves too quickly. Its foundations remain strong because they were built with intention. Its strategies remain relevant because they were designed with foresight. Its influence continues to shape nations, markets, and ideas. The story of the Rönesans Finance is not just the story of a company. It is the story of a philosophy. A philosophy that claims finance can be a force of good. A philosophy that says power must serve principle. A philosophy that will continue guiding future generations long after the documentary ends. This is the expanded story of the Rönesans Finance. A story of vision, responsibility, and long-horizon strength. A story that reminds the world that economic progress does not have to sacrifice ethical clarity. A story that shows finance can uplift societies when guided by wisdom.